You ever had one of those days that starts off so normal, so quiet, you could almost hear the grass growing? That was me, out on my ranch in central Texas, trimming an old oak limb that had started hanging too low over the barn walkway. The dogs were barking somewhere behind the tool shed. Nothing unusual. I had a thermos of black coffee cooling on the porch and a radio humming static bluegrass from the open kitchen window. The kind of morning that makes you thank God you're retired, thank God you're not stuck in courtrooms anymore, and thank God you've got 80 acres between you and whatever nonsense the world's dreaming up. That peace shattered the moment she stepped onto my land. She came walking in like she owned the dust under her shoes. I remember thinking, those heels are going to sink 2 inches deep by the time she reaches the gate. Red-bottomed, high fashion, out of place. Same with the briefcase, too shiny, too smooth. I've seen snakes with less polish. She stood still at the gate, like she was posing for a magazine cover about corporate conquest. The kind of woman who orders salads with no dressing and looks at people like their credit scores. And the look on her face? That smug little curl of a grin that city folk wear when they think they've got one over the yokels. "Mr. Thomas Grant?" She called out like it was a court summons. Not sir, not howdy, not even a good morning. Just straight business, voice sharp and practiced. I wiped the sweat off my brow with a rag, laid down my loppers, and walked toward her slowly, deliberately. I've had plenty of years in courtrooms, facing folks like her. Lawyers with shark eyes and soft hands who'd never dug a post hole in their life but thought they could rewrite the land around them with paper and ink. "That's me," I said, steady voice. She raised the manila envelope in her hand like it was a winning lottery ticket. "You've been served." And just like that, the peace I'd been living in turned brittle. She handed me the packet like she expected me to crumble. The papers inside: lawsuit from Clear Meadow Estates HOA. Claims of unauthorized structures, visual disharmony, violations of aesthetic code, and the big one: failure to obtain architectural permits. I stared at the text as if it had been written in a different language, because none of it applied. And I mean none. The name printed on the business card clipped to the front of the packet was Samantha Kent, HOA Legal Counsel. Ivy League name. I could smell the arrogance coming off her blazer. She gave me that tight-lipped smile I'd seen so many times before, in depositions and witness boxes, when someone thought they had the upper hand simply because they wore a suit and spoke in their force. "I strongly advise," she said, as if I'd asked for her counsel, "that you remove the red barn, the satellite tower, and the flagpole by week's end. Otherwise, this matter will escalate." I let her words hang there in the air, suspended like a storm cloud before the first crack of thunder. I stepped a little closer, just enough to make her shift her weight. "Miss Kent," I said calmly, "I'm a retired attorney general of this state. I helped write the land protection laws you're misquoting." Her eye twitched, barely, but it was there. That split second when confidence turns to calculation. "This land," I continued, "is exempt from HOA jurisdiction, has been for decades. It's in the zoning records, protected, separate, untouchable." I looked her in the eye. "You might want to tell your clients they just tried to sue the wrong cowboy." And then came the part that still makes me shake my head. She blinked once, then tried to recover by tightening her jaw like she was still in control. "We'll see about that," she said, turned on her heel, wobbled slightly on the gravel, and marched back to her black BMW. That woman drove off like a queen, leaving the peasantry behind, unaware she'd just started something she couldn't finish. I didn't laugh. Not yet, because I've learned that arrogance is like a slow fire. It doesn't burn fast, but it can spread damn wide if you don't stomp it out early. Now, maybe you're reading this and thinking, what's the big deal? Some HOA sent a letter. She probably made a mistake, probably just doing her job. I thought that too. I wanted to believe that, but this wasn't an honest error. This was a test. Pressure check. See, when you're retired and living quiet, they think you've gone soft. They think you've lost the edge, the fight, the memory of every battle you ever won with nothing but grit and a stack of legal code. But they picked the wrong man to test. Because I remember what it means to stand your ground. I remember what it's like to stare down bullies dressed in bureaucracy. I remember being the youngest ADA in Travis County. grilling corporations that thought they could buy silence. I remember late nights building cases to protect ranchers from eminent domain scams, from pipeline land grabs, from zoning board overreaches. And I remember the day I promised myself that when I retired, I'd live somewhere where no one could ever tell me what color my barn had to be. So yeah, I took that lawsuit seriously. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew what it represented. If they could hit me on exempt land with no authority, what chance did the average neighbor have? I sat down that evening at my desk, with a pot of black coffee and the lawsuit laid out in front of me like a crime scene. I read every word, every clause, every subpoint. Then I pulled out the zoning maps from the county office, copies I'd requested years ago when I first rebuilt the place. Sure enough, my land had been recorded as outside HOA jurisdiction since 1963, long before Clear Meadow Estates was even a blueprint. And I wasn't just relying on memory. I had the official documents, stamped, dated, sealed. They didn't have a case, but that wasn't going to stop them from trying. Because this wasn't about laws, it was about power. The HOA wasn't interested in rules. They were interested in control. And if you've lived long enough in this country, especially in small-town America, you know exactly what I mean. Power here doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it wears a smile. Sometimes it bakes cookies and runs for HOA president. Sometimes it says it's protecting community values, when what it really means is compliance, obedience, quiet submission to authority no one ever voted for. So I made a decision that night. I wasn't going to play defense. I wasn't going to wait for them to escalate. I was going to expose them, one letter, one lie, one smug smirk at a time. Because men like me, we don't go looking for fights. But when one shows up at our front gate, we don't back down either. And that's when I started building the case. Not for court, not yet, but for the truth. Because I knew, deep down, that this was bigger than me. This was about every veteran who came home just wanting peace. Every farmer who saved for 40 years just to have land of their own. Every granddad who wanted to fly a flag without asking permission. Every family who painted their door red because they liked it, not because it matched some HOA color chart. This wasn't just a lawsuit. This was a warning shot to everyone who ever thought their land made them free. And they fired it at the wrong man. So go ahead, Miss Kent. Go ahead, Janet Holloway. Go ahead and send your papers, your threats, your empty rules. You've never met a man like me. But you're about to learn what happens when the law's not just on my side. It's written in my hand. Now sit tight, friend. Because what happened next? That was just the beginning. 3 mornings after that smug lawyer handed me the lawsuit, I found a dead bird nailed to my fence post. Not a warning, not a note. Just a limp blackbird, wings stretched unnaturally, nailed clean through its chest with a roofing tack. No animal would do that. No random act of nature. That was message sending, pure and simple. I pulled it down in silence, wrapped it in a shop rag, and buried it behind the barn without telling a soul. There's a line between annoyance and intimidation, and that nail crossed it. I hadn't even begun to fight back yet, and already they were escalating. I thought the HOA's game was about bylaws and nuisance letters. But no, this was different. This was targeted, personal. The kind of thing that doesn't come from a committee meeting but from a corner conversation whispered between people who think the law is just an obstacle you throw money at until it gets out of your way. So I started watching closer, sharper. I made notes. I reviewed my property footage and replaced every camera battery even if they didn't need it. I changed up my walking routes around the land. Not because I was scared. I faced down cartel threats, dirty oil execs, and corrupt politicians. But I know one thing. When people act like rules don't apply to them, you better keep both eyes open and one hand near the hammer. Then came the drone. Low buzz, quiet, almost polite if it weren't so invasive. I caught it just after sunrise, hovering near my solar panels like a fly that had wandered too far from the manure pile. I tracked its movement for 5 full minutes before it zipped off toward Clear Meadow. That same day, a man I'd never seen before walked slowly along the dirt road that borders my west fence line. He didn't wave, didn't tip his cap, just kept glancing over the wire like he was checking out real estate he'd already signed papers for. That evening, A letter showed up in my mailbox. Not from the court. Not even from the HOA. Just a plain white envelope with no return address. Inside, typed on cheap printer paper, "We know what you're hiding." No signature. No explanation. Just that one line. Now listen, if you're a man over 60 in America today, you've probably felt what I felt in that moment. That heat rising in your chest that isn't quite fear and sure as hell isn't panic. It's older than that. It's something like how dare they. It's the feeling you get when someone threatens what you built, what you earned, what you buried family to protect. It's the knowledge that every inch of this land costs something, and you'll be damned if you hand it over to people who only know about sweat from Peloton classes. The next morning, I drove into town to visit the records clerk's office. I needed updated documentation of my land's zoning immunity, double copies, one for myself and one for the court. I also paid a visit to the local hardware store, where I picked up 2 more trail cameras and a replacement for the motion sensor that had mysteriously stopped working near the south paddock. Call it coincidence if you want. I don't. Back home, I was reattaching the sensor bracket when my neighbor Chris pulled up on his four-wheeler. Young guy, maybe mid-30s, ex-army with a limp from Fallujah and the kind of loyalty you can't buy with dues or discounts. He handed me his phone, showing a screenshot from a local community message board. One of the Clear Meadow residents had posted a photo of my barn from the road, zoomed in, grainy, and a caption that read, "Eyesore alert, still no compliance. HOA action pending." It had likes, comments, agreement. "This isn't just HOA politics," Chris said quietly. "They're building something, a whole campaign." He wasn't wrong. That evening, a truck slowed near my driveway just after dusk. Didn't stop, didn't pull in, just crawled by slow enough to make sure I saw the silhouette in the passenger seat holding up a phone, camera pointed straight at my porch. I didn't wave. I didn't shout. I simply stood up, walked to the edge of the driveway, and stared them down until they drove off. Because sometimes the best answer is your presence, unshaken, unmoved. But it was clear now they weren't just trying to take my barn. They wanted to rewrite the story of this place. Make it theirs by default. Frame me not as a landowner with rights, but as a stubborn holdout standing in the way of progress. And if you've ever lived through a rezoning battle or watched a Walmart crush a local feed store, you know how easily that narrative spreads. Especially when the ones writing it wear nice clothes and bake scones for fundraisers. So I decided to flip the script. The following Saturday, I attended the town's farmers market, something I hadn't done since spring. I wore my old campaign blazer, state seal pin and all, and made a point of talking to every vendor, every rancher, every retiree I'd ever helped during my years in office. Not about the lawsuit, not directly, but about land, about pride, about how quickly power gets centralized in the hands of the few. Every man over 60 I talked to, they knew exactly what I was getting at. Funny how people who move out to the edge of country life still want to run it like a suburb, one fella said, shaking his head. HOA told me I couldn't have a flagpole taller than my gutter, said another. Said it disrupted neighborhood symmetry. A third one just looked me dead in the eye and said, "They want the land, Tom, not the people." That night I drafted an open letter. Not to the HOA, not even to the court, but to the community. I laid out the history of my property 3 generations deep. The exemption filings, the restoration projects, the taxes I paid while Clear Meadow was still cow pasture. I ended it with a simple sentence. I don't owe allegiance to a neighborhood I was here before, but I do owe it to my family, my flag, and the land beneath my boots to stand firm. I posted it on the town's Facebook page under my full name, Thomas Grant, retired Texas Attorney General. By morning, it had 100 comments and was being shared across county groups. Some cheered, some mocked, but all read it. And the narrative? It started to shift. That same afternoon, I got a call. Blocked number. I let it go to voicemail. The message was a man's voice, low, distorted, maybe filtered. "You think the law can protect you out here? You're not in the Capitol anymore. Accidents happen." Then it clicked. Now, I'm not one for dramatics, but I do know a veiled threat when I hear it. And I also know when to stop playing chess and start playing hardball. That evening, I retrieved a particular file from my safe, one I hadn't opened since 1998. Inside was everything from a case I prosecuted against a corrupt HOA back in Brentwood County. It was eerily similar. Illegal fees, targeted intimidation, zoning abuse. Back then, we called it civil misconduct. Today, I was ready to call it what it really was, domestic coercion under the veil of governance. I contacted two friends, one a retired judge, the other a PI who owed me a favor from a federal tax case we won together years ago. I asked them both the same question. Can you help me expose an HOA that thinks it's above the law? They both said yes without hesitation. Because here's the truth, brother. And I know you know it, deep in your gut. We didn't build this country so that unelected cliques with clipboards could tell us where to hang a flag or what color a barn should be. We didn't fight wars overseas or slog through decades of hard work just to let smug lawyers and peppermint-scented presidents strip our homes of dignity one citation at a time. No, that's not what America is. And if they're gonna come for one man's ranch just because they think he's too old to push back, then they're about to find out what 68 years of knowing how the system works looks like when it fights back. They came knocking on the wrong gate. And this time, I'm not just opening it. I'm walking through, papers in hand, and I'm bringing the whole damn truth with me. It was 5:32 a.m. when the motion sensor near my north fence triggered the floodlight and sent an alert to my phone. I'd set up that particular sensor just a few days earlier after Chris found a strange set of boot prints near the creek bed that didn't belong to either of us. I threw on my boots, grabbed the flashlight, and stepped outside, the air still soaked with that chilled silence that only a Texas dawn can hold. My old dog Duke followed, tail stiff, growl low and steady. I rounded the barn and caught the tail end of movement. Two figures ducking into the tree line. Trespassers again. But this time they weren't sneaky. They left behind a half-dug hole about 10 feet from the water tanks. Inside the hole, a sealed plastic canister. I didn't open it, didn't touch it. I called Wade, the deputy, and told him what I'd found. While I waited, I sat on the porch and sipped bitter coffee, the kind that scratches your throat but wakes your bones. You reach a point in a man's life where the taste of rage becomes familiar, almost like cedar smoke or old whiskey. They were trying to plant something on me now. Chemicals, maybe. Something they could discover and use to trigger environmental charges. And I knew exactly why. Because their first lawsuit had failed. Because the narrative was no longer under their control. Because people were starting to whisper about Clear Meadow, not as a model community, but as a wolf in designer wool. When Wade showed up, he brought a state trooper with him and a hazmat bag. They took the canister, marked off the area, and assured me a report would be filed. I watched their taillights disappear down the dirt road, then walked the fence line again, slower this time. My land felt violated, and that feeling stuck with me, like a nail in the boot that you can't shake loose. Around noon, my phone rang. It was Frank Russo, the private investigator I'd called in after the drone incident. "Tom," he said, voice low and wired. "We've got something, and it's big." He was already waiting for me at the diner. Sat in a booth with his laptop open, folders spread out like a crime scene, 2 empty cups of black coffee in front of him. "Tell me," I said, sliding into the seat across from him. "I traced payments from the Clear Meadow HOA's Emergency Repair Fund to a shell company registered under a P.O. box in Houston," he said. "That shell company is linked to Samantha Kent's husband." He paused, leaned in. "It gets worse. They've been using the fund to pay off property inspectors and code enforcers. That's how they kept complaints flowing and charges vague. It's not just your land they've been after, Tom. You're just the one who wouldn't budge." I stared at the receipt copies he pushed toward me. Thousands of dollars funneled into consulting services and land use assessments. All of it fake. All of it planned. "It's fraud," I said quietly. "Worse," Frank replied. "It's organized abuse of authority, and it goes back years." I left that diner with a folder under my arm and a plan taking shape in my mind. I wasn't just going to defend my land. I was going to tear down the system that tried to weaponize its rules. The next move? I needed an audience. That Sunday, our county held a civic meeting at the town hall. Nothing fancy. Folding chairs. Lukewarm lemonade. But the people came. Farmers, veterans, retirees, men who'd seen too much in women who'd kept entire families running on grit and prayer. I stood up after the third agenda item and raised my hand. Before you move on, I said, I'd like to speak. The moderator hesitated. Mr. Grant, this isn't a legal forum. No, I said. It's a citizens' forum, and I have something every citizen in this county needs to hear. They gave me 5 minutes. I took 20. I laid out the history of the harassment, the drone, the lawsuits, the false complaints. I showed them a redacted receipt from Frank's investigation, explained how HOA funds were being misused, how power was being consolidated by intimidation. This isn't just my story, I said. This is a warning, because if it can happen to a man with a badge and a lifetime in the law, it can damn sure happen to you. The room was dead silent. Then someone clapped. Then another. Then the whole place stood up and cheered like they'd been waiting for someone to say what they'd felt for years, but hadn't had the words, or the strength, to speak. Afterward, a rancher named Ed pulled me aside. They tried to fine me for putting a windmill up, he said. Said it messed with the visual tranquility of the neighborhood. I lived 2 miles from the nearest house. Another man said they fined his sister for hanging laundry outside on a sunny day. Another said her father had been banned from planting vegetables in his front yard. And these weren't isolated stories. They were part of a pattern. A silent invasion disguised as governance. That night, I started writing again. Not just journals, testimonies. I gathered statements, signatures, and declarations. I sent copies to the state attorney general's office. I filed a formal ethics complaint against Samantha Kent's law firm, and I worked with Lauren Bell, the county prosecutor, to prepare a civil action against the Clear Meadow HOA for systemic harassment. I wasn't alone anymore. People were coming out of the shadows, shaking off the shame of silence. Because when one man stands up, it reminds the others that their spines still work too. By the end of the week, news vans were parked at the edge of my pasture. Reporters asked for interviews. I gave them a simple quote. HOAs were meant to protect neighborhoods, not terrorize them. Somewhere along the way, they forgot. That quote hit the evening news, then the national wire. Emails poured in. Veterans from Georgia. Widows from Ohio. A man from Nevada whose HOA made him paint over a mural of his dead son because it wasn't on the approved color scheme. Each story a piece of the same puzzle. Power without accountability. That's when I knew this wasn't just a legal battle. It was a reckoning. And the people behind it, they were starting to panic. I know this because 2 nights later my electric gate jammed open. When I checked the circuit, I found wire that had been stripped and reconnected improperly, deliberately. Someone wanted in, or someone wanted someone else to walk in. Either way, it was a warning, but not to me, to themselves. Because when cowards escalate, it means they're out of moves. It means they're desperate, and desperate people always trip over the truth. I went to bed that night with a loaded revolver beside my nightstand and the file labeled Operation Retaliation resting beside it. I wasn't planning revenge. I was documenting history, and the next chapter, it was going to be written in court ink, not fear, because justice might sleep sometimes, but when she wakes up, she rides with a badge and a gavel. And if they wanted war, then they picked the wrong veteran to start it with. It was just past midnight when I heard the faint, rhythmic hum of an engine in the distance. I lay still in bed, Duke already awake beside me, ears perked and nose in the air. That sound didn't belong to a neighbor's tractor or a delivery truck. It was too deliberate, too steady, and too out of place for that hour. I got up, slid on my boots, and grabbed the flashlight. The generator was still running, house lights dimmed low. But when I stepped out on the porch, the hum had stopped, just as sudden as it came. Then came the silence, the kind that presses into your chest like a warning you can't see. I scanned the horizon, saw nothing but darkness beyond the stretch of my land. Still, I walked the perimeter with Duke, every step stiff with anticipation. At the southeast fence post, I found it. A black duffel bag zipped tight, no markings. Not buried, just tucked low in the tall grass like a coward's threat left in the dark. I didn't touch it. I radioed Wade. He was out here in under 15 minutes, wearing his raincoat and rubbing sleep from his eyes. When they unzipped the bag, they found 4 cans of pesticide, 2 empty spray bottles, and a copy of my water table map printed and marked in red. Someone had plans. And those plans weren't about winning in court anymore. They were about ruining me by any means necessary. Wade looked at me, shook his head. Tom, they're escalating again. Let them, I said. I've already dug the grave. They're the ones jumping in headfirst. By morning, I had 5 calls waiting. 3 were reporters. 1 was the county prosecutor's office. But the last one caught me off guard. It was a woman named Carol Davis. Soft voice, clear tone. Former treasurer of Clear Meadow HOA. I want to talk, she said. I'm done protecting them. We met at a small coffee shop near the edge of town. She wore a gray cardigan. No makeup, eyes sharp and scared all at once. I stayed quiet, she said, because Janet threatened everyone who pushed back, changed meeting minutes, bullied residents, used fines like weapons. But I have everything. The originals, meeting logs, budget files, emails, all of it. I stared at her. Why now? Because you didn't back down, she said. And neither should anyone else. That evening, Carol handed me a box. Inside, the paper trail of an empire built on fear and enforced by manipulation. And at the bottom, stapled neatly, was a memo, stamped confidential, from 6 months before the first complaint ever reached me. Its subject line? Operation Fence Out. The goal? To absorb non-HOA lands by fabricating complaints, manipulating zoning proposals, and making life miserable for landowners who didn't fit the aesthetic mission. I read it twice. My name was in it. My ranch. My barn. My flagpole. This wasn't about community planning. This was a hostile annexation dressed up in fake civility. I didn't call Wade this time. I called Frank Russo. We met in my barn, lights dimmed, files spread across a plywood table I used for repairs. When Frank saw the memo, he didn't even blink. This is it, he said. This is the blueprint of their fraud. And it's time we take it up the ladder. We compiled everything. Carol's files, Frank's financial trail, the canister from the creek, the duffel bag, the planted inspectors, the online threats. We wrapped it all into one package and sent it straight to ADA Lauren Bell and 2 state oversight agencies. The storm that followed was immediate. Warrants, subpoenas, press leaks. Within a week, the Clear Meadow HOA office had been raided. Janet's laptop seized. Samantha Kent's firm placed under internal investigation by the State Bar. The dominoes were falling, but they didn't go down quietly. 3 days after the raid, my mailbox was torn out of the ground and dumped into my horse trough. 2 nights later, someone fired 2 shots into my barn wall. Not at me, not to kill, but to send a message. That was their mistake. I don't rattle. I rebuild. I reinforced the barn, installed thermal cameras, and had Chris and 2 other veterans rotate watch shifts at night with me. And every time we sat there in the dark, rifles leaned against our chairs, we talked. About the country, about what used to be, about how too many people now wear titles without earning respect. And that's what this whole fight was really about. Not just fences or bylaws, but the abuse of fake authority, of people who forgot that freedom was earned, not given, that dignity wasn't defined by a board vote or color-coded sidewalks. It came from hard work, quiet sacrifice, and the unspoken bond between men who understand what it means to build something real. Then the court date came. Not the first. This was the big one. The fraud case. The conspiracy charge. The ethics violation hearings. I walked into that courtroom with a leather briefcase full of truth and a fire that had taken 6 months to shape. The room was packed. Reporters. Neighbors. Former board members. Carol was there too, hands trembling but eyes proud. Janet Holloway sat at the defendant's table, flanked by a new lawyer, her face pale, her power drained. Samantha Kent didn't even show. Her license had already been suspended, her name already mud. The judge listened. I testified. Wade testified. Frank testified. Even Carol took the stand and read aloud the minutes Janet had falsified, down to the day and dollar. When it was over, the judge didn't even hesitate. The HOA was dissolved. His funds frozen. Janet Holloway charged with conspiracy, fraud, and harassment. The court ordered restitution to every resident fined illegally. And me? I was awarded damages. $75,000. But I didn't keep a dime. I split it 3 ways. The volunteer fire department that saved my barn from a brush fire, the veterans center Chris had helped rebuild, and a local fund for families bullied by HOAs. The message wasn't about money. It was about justice with teeth. After the ruling, I stood outside the courthouse. Cameras flashed. Microphones crowded. But I said one thing and one thing only. You don't get to rewrite the rules to fit your control. Not on my watch. That night, I got home late. Duke met me at the gate, tail wagging slow like he knew the war had ended. I walked my land under the stars, hand resting lightly on the fence wire I'd repaired for the 100th time. It was still standing. So was I. But just as I reached the porch, my phone buzzed. A text. Unknown number. No name. Just 7 words. We're next. You showed us how. I didn't sleep that night, not from fear, but from something else. A feeling I hadn't had in a long time. The feeling of legacy, not just surviving but protecting, building, inspiring. And I knew then that this fight wasn't the end. It was only chapter 4. The rest would be written by the men and women ready to take their land, their peace, and their voice back. One stand at a time. It began with a whisper, barely a flicker on the radar. A phone call here, a letter there. Strangers reaching out from different states, different counties, telling me their stories like old soldiers comparing battle scars. A man in Georgia fined $500 for having a flag too large. A widow in Arizona threatened with foreclosure because her rose garden didn't match the neighborhood's xeriscaping theme. A Vietnam vet in Montana who paved his own driveway and got sued for not submitting an architectural revision application. One by one they came. Some angry, some exhausted, all of them beaten down by paper tyrants and plastic authority. And somehow, in the aftermath of my own storm, they'd found something in my fight that lit a match inside their chests. They weren't looking for a hero, just a reminder that they weren't crazy, that standing your ground still meant something. I started getting invited to speak at small town halls, county meetings, and even one local fair where I stood between a funnel cake truck and a 4-H livestock tent, talking about zoning laws to a crowd of ranchers and retirees who understood every damn word. What surprised me most wasn't that people were mad. It was that they had been mad for years, but they'd been told to stay polite, to play nice, to be neighborly, and that neighborliness had turned into silence, into submission, into watching their own yards become stages for HOA theater. Complete with fines, rules written in invisible ink, and power plays disguised as community care. So I told them what I knew, that there's nothing unneighborly about standing up for yourself, that no board has the right to rewrite your rights, that civility without justice is just compliance in costume. And slowly, the whispers turned louder. Across the country, a group calling itself the Silent Six published a manifesto online, a direct call to action inspired by my case. They weren't just ranting, they were organizing, filing public records requests, holding their own community audits. One member even ran for a local office and won. Their tagline? We don't back down, we document. I started helping where I could, reviewing paperwork, connecting folks to lawyers who didn't roll over for convenience. And then came the letter from the State Legal Coalition. A panel was being formed to evaluate HOA reform policy across Texas, and they wanted me to sit on it. You've been in the courtroom, the invitation read. Now we need your voice in the room where policies are written. I wasn't sure at first. Part of me just wanted peace. But another part remembered every rock, every lie, every inch of fence line I'd had to reclaim with grit and law. And I realized something. Fighting back doesn't end when the bullies leave. It ends when the rules change. So I joined. We met once a month in Austin. A group of lawyers, lawmakers, homeowners, and a few former HOA officers who'd turned whistleblower. We reviewed hundreds of abuse cases, some small, some mind-numbing. A man charged $200 a month for shade debt because his tree cast shadows on a common sidewalk. A grandmother told she couldn't host Bible study in her home without HOA permit approval. A veteran evicted for flying both a U.S. flag and a POW MIA banner on the same pole. It was eye-opening, infuriating, but it also made me believe something I hadn't in a while, that real reform isn't just possible, it's necessary. We proposed 5 key bills. Mandatory third-party audits for all HOAs above a certain size. A legal defense fund for homeowners targeted by malicious fines. Criminal penalties for board members caught misappropriating funds or using their title to intimidate. A homeowner's bill of rights posted in every HOA-run neighborhood. And public access to HOA voting records and internal decisions. We didn't win them all, but we won enough. And once the press picked it up, once people started realizing their story wasn't isolated but part of a broken pattern, support exploded. Even lawmakers who once brushed it off had to admit, HOAs were no longer just yard patrols and paint swatches. They were unregulated microgovernments, and it was time someone reminded them who really holds the power in a free country. But just when I thought we'd reached the high point, just when I believed I'd fought my last major battle, something else happened. Carol Davis, the former treasurer who first helped expose Clear Meadow, reached out again. "There's something you should see," she said. We met at a library in a quiet county north of mine. She handed me a flash drive. "These files, they came from a state database leak," she whispered. "Internal correspondence between HOA developers, certain legal firms, and real estate PACs. What I saw made my stomach turn. A coordinated effort to expand HOA jurisdiction into rural zones, targeting unincorporated lands with high value but low political clout. They called it regenerative aesthetic expansion. But the goal was clear: swallow up independent properties by offering integration incentives, then impose soft authority through rewritten covenants and backdoor zoning votes. My ranch was supposed to be the test case, and they'd failed. But others wouldn't be so lucky. "They're already setting meetings with county assessors," Carol said. "Once it starts, landowners won't even realize what's happening until they're surrounded." I called Frank Russo. Together, we took those files to the district attorney. This time, it went beyond harassment. It was land acquisition by manipulation. The DA opened an investigation, and with help from a few brave insiders, we traced the network to a real estate development firm based out of Dallas. Quietly, without alerting the public, the state issued cease and desist orders on 5 pending HOA expansion plans. And in a closed session, I was asked one final question by the State Oversight Committee. "Mr. Grant, after all this, what keeps you going?" I looked them square in the eye and answered, "Because the minute you stop protecting land, you stop protecting liberty. And I ain't ever been the kind to walk away from either." Months later, when the news finally broke, I didn't give a press statement. I didn't take a victory lap. I walked out to my porch with a cup of black coffee and watched Duke chase a squirrel down by the fence. My phone buzzed. A text from Chris. Said only one thing. "Still standing, old man. Just like you taught us." I grinned, because that's all I ever wanted. Not a headline, not a statue. Just a country where a man can live honest on his own land without fear of a fine for flying a flag. That night, as the wind howled low across the pasture and the stars settled into place, I wrote one final line in my notebook. "They tried to fence us in. We built a door instead. And maybe, just maybe, if enough of us keep walking through it, they'll remember. The law isn't a weapon. It's a promise. And some of us are still old-fashioned enough to keep it."